In this video, I'm going to try and explain away some of the misinformation about voltage-controlled oscillators. There's a lot of myths going around that analog is better than digital. Digital has better waveforms. Analog has distortion and warmth. That's why analog VCOs are better, and back and forth and both sides. So what I'm attempting to do here is explain the difference between and similarities with an oscilloscope as to what the different VCOs and a variety of synthesizers look like, not sound like, because our ears lie to us. But if you can see what the waveforms actually look like, it will dispel a lot of the mythology. So we start off with the theoretical perfect waveforms, which are on the screen right now, which is a sine wave, a square wave, a triangle wave, and a ramp waveform, also known as a sawtooth. And the ramp and sawtooth can be forward sloping or backward sloping. They're both the same. Usually we encounter the slope forward, that the frequency waveform rises to a peak and then drops, and then rises and drops. That's a forward ramp wave. This first example is a voltage-controlled oscillator from a 1970s PIA, P-A-I-A, modular synthesizer, and it is 100% analog. And we're going to take a look at the waveforms. This first waveform is a backwards ramp from the VCO. This is the triangle from the PIA VCO. And coming up next is a sine wave. Notice there's slight distortion at the bottom of the sine wave. It's not perfect, but it's darn close, especially the top end. Is a very good sine wave. And we're slowing down the frequency to sync it with the oscilloscope. Now we're on to the square wave, which is basically a 50% pulse wave, and here we're modulating the pulse width from 50 to about 90%. And there's about 90, here we're back to, less than 50. But you can see it's got a little bit of slant to it. It's not a perfect square wave. This next example is from a Moog Werkstatt, which is a $200 kit that was available for a limited time from Moog. Small. I modded mine to fit in Eurorack, but it's still basically the same thing. And these are the waveforms from that Moog module. Now the Werkstatt only has two waveforms to it, and here they come. This is the forward ramp sawtooth. I'm just in the scope. Now one thing I'll say on away from the PIA did not have stable frequencies. It drifted a little bit, which is why the scope images looked pretty bad. But here is the ramp and the sawtooth from the Werkstatt. Now while we're on Moog, these are the waveforms from a Moog Mother 32. A lot more expensive than the Werkstatt, but fairly inexpensive as far as synths go, especially from Moog. This is the uh, sawtooth waveform from the Motor 32, and you can see that it's pretty good. Now we're switching over to the square wave, which has pulse width modulation, but you can see that it's fairly good, and the range of the pulse width modulation is from 10% to 90%, give or take, and it still is not perfect. You can see that the they aren't perfectly flat. Now we'll compare that to the Behringer Model D, which is a clone, repo, whatever you want to call it, of the Mini Moog, and we'll see what that looks like. Now the Model D has two oscillators which provide a triangle and a pulse waveform. So I'll show you both of those. This is the triangle waveform. Trying to adjust the scope to sync on it. There we go. There's a triangle from the one oscillator from the Model D. Great triangle. And there it is again, I'm playing with the controls, so bear with, switching cables around. There you see a little flaw in the triangle as it switches to the pulse, but the pulse is pretty good. Again, you see the slight sloping. That was the sawtooth, and I'm just switching between them. But you can see they're all pretty good, a little bit of flaws on them, but it actually stays in tune better than the old Mini Moog. There's the other oscillator, triangle, sawtooth forward and back, and there's the square wave with pulse modulation, and there's a sawtooth. I forgot the Mini Moog had both triangle, sawtooth, and pulse. The next example is a Behringer neutron, also Eurorack mounted. This is an unusual VCO because it's dual VCOs with swapping between waveforms is a continuous rather than a switch, so it goes from one waveform, morphs it into another, so it's a little difficult, and I'm just going to show you the waveforms, and you can probably figure it all out rather than me explaining what's going on. The interesting thing about this morphing is you get a real variety of waveforms without too much trouble. You're going from one to the other, and in between you're getting a mix of the two that is neither one or the other, and it's gives you quite a variety of tonal qualities. That's me switching between the two oscillators. Trying to switch between the two oscillators. There we go. Again, I find this morphing fascinating. One of the neat features on the Neutron. There are other synths that have this as well. I'm just like using this one as an example of what that looks like. It's not switching between waveforms, but morphing between waveforms. This example is a Korg MS-20 from the 70s, and it is analog, And these are the waveforms it produces from its two VCOs. Here is Korg analog version of a sine wave. It's good at the bottom and pointy at the top. It's not perfect. We go to the sawtooth waveform and it is a little bent. Here's a really strange one. It's kind of a double sawtooth waveform, and they remorph into the kind of odd shaped waveform. There we are back to the up and down, and there's the pulse. This is a Synths Eurorack VCO. Very basic, it's just the VCO for Eurorack, but we're going to look at the waveforms it produces. Here we have a very nice sawtooth ramp waveform. And we switch the chord over. Here we have a very nice triangle. Very well defined. Here we have the square wave, pulse wave modulation going on. Very nice. Slightly tilted, but some of that tilting you can chalk up to this old oscilloscope. I'm using my antique Heathkit scope, one that I built synths with back in the 70s. And again, from all these, take it for what it's worth. Not all VCOs are created equal. However, the slight differences that you're seeing, you're not going to hear except in your imagination when somebody says, oh, this is a Moog VCO, or this is, this is a ARP VCO. And it's like, a triangle is a triangle. Slight deviations can affect it, but most of the time, you're not going to hear those differences. You're not going to hear those minute harmonics.